froze mid-step when she saw him. A little boy, tears streaming down his dirt-streaked face, clutching a crumpled note like it was the only thing keeping him standing. He didn't speak. He didn't cry out. He simply held out the note. When she opened it, her eyes widened and her heart raced. The words on the paper sent chills down her spine. She looked up at the boy, her voice trembling. "Who gave you this?" The boy's answer would change everything. Imagine being in her place. How would you react? Before we dive into this shocking story, hit the like button, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more gripping tales that'll leave you speechless. Now, let's find out what was written on that life-changing note. The emergency room of St. Mary's General Hospital was alive with its usual chaos, a symphony of hurried footsteps, soft murmurs of conversations, and the occasional beeping of monitors. The faint smell of disinfectant lingered in the air, blending with the sterile glow of fluorescent lights. Families sat in the waiting area, some whispering anxiously, others staring blankly at their phones. Behind the reception desk stood Nurse Emily Carter, a seasoned professional in her mid-30s. Her auburn hair was tied into a loose bun, and her kind hazel eyes carried the weight of years spent comforting strangers in their most vulnerable moments. Emily had always been the heart of the ER, known for her ability to stay calm under pressure and her innate gift of empathy. Emily had been a nurse for over a decade. She joined the medical field after losing her younger brother in a tragic accident, vowing to dedicate her life to helping others. Despite her warm demeanor, the memory of her brother's loss often haunted her, fueling her determination to save every life she could. Her work was more than a job. It was her way of healing, a daily attempt to give families what she could never have herself: hope and comfort. A frail figure entered the ER, catching her attention. It was a little boy, no older than 7, with messy brown hair. He wore a tattered blue hoodie and sneakers that looked 2 sizes too big. His hands were smudged with dirt, and his pale face bore the telltale signs of fear and exhaustion. Clutching a crumpled piece of paper, he looked around the room as if searching for someone who could help. The boy's name was Lucas, a 7-year-old with a quiet resilience born out of necessity. For weeks, he had been living on the streets, surviving on scraps and the kindness of strangers after fleeing an abusive home. Despite his young age, Lucas carried a sense of responsibility that no child should ever have to bear. He wasn't in the ER for himself. The note he clutched wasn't just a piece of paper. It was a plea for help, a final effort to save someone he deeply cared about. Emily froze mid-step when her eyes met Lucas's. The chaos of the ER seemed to fade into the background. She could feel the urgency radiating from him. Taking a deep breath, she knelt down to his level, her voice soft but firm. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" she asked. Lucas didn't speak. He simply extended the note, his hands trembling. Emily hesitated for a moment before taking it. As she unfolded the paper, her pulse quickened. The harsh fluorescent lights reflected off the polished floors, and the low hum of the vending machine near the waiting area droned on. Outside the glass doors, rain began to fall, streaking the hospital's facade and mirroring the boy's desperation. For Emily, the stakes were profound, another soul in need of saving. But as she read the note, her breath hitched. The words on the paper carried a weight she wasn't prepared for. She looked up at Lucas, her voice trembling. "Who gave you this?" Lucas's answer would change everything. Emily's eyes scanned the note, her hands trembling as she gripped the paper. The message was hastily scribbled, the handwriting uneven and shaky. It read, "Help him. Alley behind the hospital. Hurry." Her heart raced as she looked back at Lucas, who stood frozen, his wide eyes filled with fear. "Who's in the alley, Lucas?" she asked softly, her voice betraying her rising panic. Lucas hesitated, his lips quivering, then whispered, "My brother. He's hurt. Please don't let him die." Emily's stomach knotted. This wasn't just any emergency, this was a matter of life and death. She turned to her colleague, Nurse Jacob, and quickly relayed the situation. "Call security and the police," she instructed, her tone firm. "I'm going out there." Jacob's eyes widened. "Emily, are you sure? It could be dangerous." But there was no time for hesitation. Emily grabbed a flashlight and a first aid kit, her mind racing with possibilities. Was it an accident? A crime? She didn't know, but she couldn't ignore the urgency in Lucas's plea. The nurse froze mid-step when she saw him, a little boy, tears streaming down his dirt-streaked face, clutching a crumpled note, like it was the only thing keeping. "Where is he?" Emily whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of the rain. Lucas pointed to a cluster of crates near the alley's end. Emily approached cautiously, her heart pounding. She could make out the faint outline of a figure slumped against the wall. As she got closer, the beam of her flashlight revealed a teenage boy, pale and motionless, his clothes soaked with rain and stained with blood. Emily dropped to her knees beside him, her nurse instincts kicking in. She checked his pulse, weak but present. His breathing was shallow, and his face was bruised, with a gash on his forehead that trickled blood down his cheek. "What happened to him?" Emily asked, her voice shaking. Lucas stood a few feet away, his arms wrapped tightly around himself. "Some men, they hurt him. He tried to protect me," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't know where else to go. I thought you could help." Emily's chest tightened. This wasn't just a medical emergency. It was a story of survival, of a boy who had risked everything to save his brother. She worked quickly, applying pressure to the wound and wrapping the boy's head in gauze to stop the bleeding. Suddenly, the sound of approaching footsteps echoed in the alley. Emily's flashlight darted toward the source, her grip tightening instinctively. A man's voice called out, harsh and threatening. "You think you can hide from us?" Lucas's eyes widened in terror as he ducked behind Emily. "It's them!" he cried, his voice trembling. Emily's mind raced. The boys' attackers were still after them. The stakes had just escalated, and time was running out. She shielded Lucas protectively, her voice firm as she yelled, "Stay back! The police are on their way!" The men hesitated, their shadows lurking at the edge of the alley, but their presence only intensified the danger. Emily's focus shifted between the injured boy and the approaching threat. In that moment, the wail of distant sirens broke through the tension. Emily's heart lifted with a flicker of hope, but the danger was far from over. The men exchanged glances, retreating into the darkness just as the flashing red and blue lights illuminated the alley. As the police arrived, Emily turned to Lucas, her voice steady despite the chaos. "You're safe now, I promise." But deep down, she knew this was only the beginning. Whatever had brought these boys to her ER that night, it was far more dangerous than she'd anticipated. The stakes were higher than she'd ever imagined, and the truth behind that note was yet to fully unravel. The alley was now alive with flashing red and blue lights, casting eerie shadows on the damp walls. Police officers swarmed the scene, their voices crackling through radios. Emily stayed kneeling beside the injured boy, her hand steady, but her heart racing. Lucas clung to her side, his small frame trembling as officers questioned him. Suddenly, one of the officers called out, "We found something." The crowd parted as an officer emerged from the shadows, holding a small, blood-stained backpack. He unzipped it carefully, revealing a bundle of cash and a stack of photographs. Emily's stomach dropped as the officer's expression turned grim. He held up one of the photos. It was of Lucas and his brother, smiling in a small, cluttered living room. But behind them stood a man with a sinister glare, his hand gripping Lucas's shoulder tightly. "Do you recognize this man?" the officer asked Lucas. Lucas hesitated, tears welling in his eyes before whispering, "That's my stepfather." Emily's breath caught in her throat. She placed a protective hand on Lucas's shoulder. "What happened, Lucas?" she asked gently. "He's the one who hurt my brother," Lucas admitted, his voice trembling. He said if we ever told anyone, he'd he'd find us. But my brother said we had to run, that we'd never be safe if we stayed. Emily felt a wave of anger and heartbreak. This wasn't just a case of two boys in danger. This was a calculated act of cruelty and control. She looked at the injured boy, realizing the extent of his bravery in protecting Lucas. As the officers processed the scene, another voice interrupted. "We've got him!" The air grew tense as the officers dragged a man into view. He was tall, with a scruffy beard and a look of pure malice in his eyes. Lucas froze, gripping Emily's arm tightly. "It's him!" Lucas cried, pointing at the man. "That's my stepfather!" The man snarled, thrashing against the officer's grip. "You little rats! You think you can run from me?" Emily's protective instincts flared. She stepped in front of Lucas, shielding him from the man's venomous glare. "You're not going to hurt them anymore," she said firmly, her voice steady despite the rage bubbling inside her. The officers wasted no time restraining the man and loading him into the back of a squad car. As he disappeared into the night, the alley seemed to breathe again. Emily turned back to Lucas, her voice soft. "You're safe now, both of you." Lucas's tears spilled over as he hugged Emily tightly. His brother stirred slightly, his eyelids fluttering open. The sight of Lucas brought a faint smile to his battered face. "I told you we'd make it," his brother whispered weakly, his voice filled with a mix of pain and relief. In that moment, the weight of the night lifted, replaced by the unbreakable bond between two brothers who had risked everything for each other. Emily felt tears sting her eyes, overwhelmed by the resilience and bravery of the two boys. As the paramedics wheeled the older brother into the ambulance, Lucas turned to Emily. "Thank you," he said, his voice small but filled with gratitude. Emily knelt down to meet his gaze. "You're one of the bravest kids I've ever met, Lucas. Never forget that." The ambulance doors closed, and the sirens faded into the distance, leaving Emily standing in the rain-soaked alley. She looked at the crumpled note in her hand, a reminder of the courage it took for one little boy to seek help and change the course of their lives forever. As the ambulance disappeared into the night, the once chaotic alley fell silent. The police had wrapped up their investigation, leaving only a few officers behind to ensure Emily and Lucas were safe. The rain had eased to a light drizzle, and the air felt heavier, as if the tension of the night had finally begun to dissipate. Emily sat beside Lucas on the steps outside the ER, a blanket draped over his small shoulders. His trembling had stopped, but his wide eyes remained fixed on the ground. He looked both exhausted and relieved, the weight of the night visibly starting to lift. One of the officers approached Emily, nodding respectfully. "The stepfather has a long record. We've been after him for years. Thanks to Lucas, we finally have enough to keep him behind bars." Emily nodded, her heart swelling with pride for the boy sitting beside her. "What happens to Lucas and his brother now?" she asked, concern etched in her voice. "They'll be taken into protective custody for now," the officer replied. "We'll ensure they're placed somewhere safe, away from anyone who might try to harm them." Hearing this, Lucas looked up at Emily, his voice small. "Will I get to see my brother again?" Emily placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Of course you will, Lucas. You're both safe now, and no one can hurt you anymore." Lucas nodded slowly, his lips curling into a faint smile. For the first time that night, he looked like a child again, vulnerable but hopeful. Inside the hospital, Emily learned that Lucas's brother was stable. The boy had suffered severe injuries, but thanks to Lucas's quick thinking and her timely intervention, he was now on the road to recovery. The doctors commended Emily for her courage, but she brushed off their praise, knowing the true hero was the little boy who had handed her that note. As dawn broke, casting soft golden light over the hospital, Emily walked Lucas to the waiting social worker. Lucas hesitated before stepping forward, then turned back and hugged Emily tightly. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice barely audible. Emily knelt down to his level, her own eyes brimming with tears. "You're braver than most grown-ups I know, Lucas. Don't ever forget that." The social worker gently took Lucas's hand and led him toward a waiting car. Emily watched as he climbed inside, his small figure disappearing into the back seat. The ER was quieter now, but Emily couldn't shake the profound impact of the night's events. The crumpled note, now safely tucked into her pocket, was a stark reminder of how one small act of courage had saved 2 lives and brought an abuser to justice. As she stepped back into the hospital, the chaos of the ER resumed around her. But Emily carried a newfound sense of purpose, her resolve stronger than ever. She knew she couldn't save everyone, but on this night she had made a difference, and that was enough. Weeks passed since that rainy night at St. Mary's General Hospital, but the memory of Lucas and his brother lingered vividly in Emily's mind. The note he had handed her, now carefully pressed and tucked into her journal, served as a constant reminder of the courage a small boy could summon in the face of unimaginable fear. Lucas and his brother had been placed in the care of a loving foster family. Emily had received updates from the social worker who described how the boys were thriving in their new environment. Lucas, once timid and wary, was slowly beginning to trust again, while his brother was making a remarkable recovery. For Emily, the night had been a turning point. She often reflected on the moments leading up to that note, how close Lucas had been to losing hope, how a small act of bravery had changed their lives. It reminded her that even in the darkest times, a single decision could create a ripple effect of change. The hospital staff, too, had been inspired by the story. Emily's colleagues spoke about it often, using it as an example of why they had chosen the medical field. They had seen countless emergencies, but few had touched their hearts as deeply as this one. One quiet evening, Emily received a handwritten letter in the mail. It was from Lucas. In his uneven, childlike handwriting, he thanked her for saving his brother and for being the one person who made him feel safe that night. At the bottom of the letter, he had drawn a small heart with the words, "You're my hero." Tears filled Emily's eyes as she read the letter. She folded it carefully and placed it beside the crumpled note in her journal, her heart swelling with gratitude and purpose. The experience had taught her a profound lesson, that bravery isn't always loud, and heroes aren't always those who wear capes. Sometimes they're small hands holding a note, a kind word in a moment of fear, or a single decision to care when it matters most. As Emily walked into her next shift, she felt a renewed sense of determination. The ER was just as busy as ever, filled with people in need. But now she carried the story of Lucas and his brother with her, a quiet reminder that every life she touched could be part of a greater story. And as the hospital doors opened to another new face, Emily stood ready, knowing that even the smallest acts of courage could change everything. If this story moved you as much as it did us, don't forget to hit the like button and share it with someone who might need a little inspiration today. Stories like these remind us of the power of courage, kindness, and taking action when it matters most. We'd love to hear your thoughts. What would you have done if you were in the nurse's or Lucas's place? Drop your opinions in the comment section below, and let's start a conversation about how small acts of bravery can create big change. And if you want more stories that inspire, shock, or make you think, hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another one. Together, let's celebrate the power of human resilience and compassion. See you in the next video.